Hello, this is Chris Gannon. I want to show you how to make this very cool light progress bar by Constantine on CodePen. He has made it in CSS and I actually learned quite a few things, even though I don't use CSS very much. I prefer JavaScript. I didn't actually learn so much about CSS, but I did learn a lot about how just a different way of building things, and just by looking at the CSS and seeing how he, for example, how he made the gradients and how he looped these colors. Yeah, let's have a look at. We're going to do it in CSS. Sorry, we're going to do it in SVG. This is the version I've made in SVG, which is pretty much exactly perfect, the same. One thing I specifically like about this as well is the fact that the shadows have got are coloured, so that the whole thing, it adds a beautiful translucence to the whole thing. Right. Okay. So what was I going to do? Oh yeah. Let's have a look in his CSS. Right. So what I learnt from this is that this the actual, let me bring this up a little bit. The actual colours, they're not, see, the way I probably would approach this is all wrong. I would have probably made a rectangle of green, rectangle of yellow, one of red, orange, etc. Stuck them all together with an extra one on the end so that it can loop and then keep going, left all the way over to the left and then jump back, and then all the way to the left, jump back on a loop, so an X loop. Exposition loop. But what he's done is, and it's really cool, it's done a linear gradient of one colour up to from 0 to 20%, and then the next one from 20% to 40%, and then the next one from 40% to 60%. So there's no bleed between colours. It's just a sharp cut to the next colour in the gradient, which is probably extremely efficient. And he's put the background, this is another thing I learned as well, he's put the background position at 0, 0 and then basically animated the background position, which is a seriously clever way of doing it. And you're probably asking, well, hang on, why, if this is so efficient, why are you doing it in SVG? And the answer is because I can and because I want to, and I love SVG and I want to practice all the time, and doing these demos and tutorials and stuff, it hones my skills, and I share what I learn with other people, and it helps me get better at what I'm doing. So I'm going to do it in SVG. So there. Just to sort of pick up on that background position point, right? So in SVG you don't really have background position. You do have linear gradient, which is what we're going to use, and that's cool. But you don't have background position. But what we do have is pattern or patterns. So we're going to use a pattern in SVG to basically create this really gorgeous animation. Okay. So we're going to go over to Illustrator because that's where I live most of the time nowadays. So I always end up with if you've seen any of my videos before, I always draw what's called a context layer. It's just a rectangle. It's the same size as the artboard. It's a horrible colour usually, so that I can recognise it when I paste it over. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create a gradient. Now I've already done it. But what we can do is we can look at how I've done it. So this is the gradient palette. Ooh, is that still on the screen? No, let's just make that a bit smaller. And really it's just mimicked what Constantine's done. I've created a yellow gradient all the way up to 20%, and then buggered it up now. No! Right, put that to 20%. Well, why are you doing that now? Put you at 20%, and then put you at 20%. 20%. There you go. And the same for all the colours. and I've copied what he's done, and I've made a rectangle that's 400 pixels wide, and then applied this gradient to it. So I mean I think that's pretty straightforward. So let's move this out of the way, and so you can see this is if you look over here, this is the rectangle this is the gradient that I've applied, and I've applied it to this. So that's cool, and they're all equally spaced out. So just to note, I could, just to show, if I select that and then I just move this around, it makes this bleed a little bit, okay? But I'm not going to do that. Okay, so that's the first thing. I've got it kind of centered in the middle of the artboard. The next thing to do is to create the tube, which is going to be a mask, and that's over the top, and again that's 400 pixels wide and I don't know what, 30 pixels high or something like that. If you looked at any of my other tutorials, the masking one, specifically the knockout masking one, we're going to use a similar technique, but we're just going to use the mask, and it has to be white because anything inside a mask that is white shows through. And then let's get rid of that for a minute. There's also a really lovely little shine that he's added. If we just go back over to his, oops. Right, so, and if you look here, there's a lovely little shine along there with a transparency. We're going to do that. Now I thought, well, you know, I could just draw a line and then draw another little extra bit on the end. But actually, we can do all that in one, just using dash array on the stroke. So if you bring down stroke, you'll notice that it's actually a dashed line with segments that are 346 pixels wide, with a gap of 6 pixels, and that ends up with this little missing bit here. That way we have several graphics. We've just got one graphic with a native sort of command to tell it to have that gap. Yeah, I think as well, the other thing about the way Constantine did this was everything that he did was pretty clever, really. Everything was native. Like the background position, there was no sort of animating left positions or anything like that. It was all sort of using the sort of most basic sort of raw elements to get it to work, and I really kind of like that. He didn't add any sort of fluff to it. That's all we need. You can't see the shine, but it's there. So what we do is we copy everything over. I've noticed I've named it here. I've given them names: shine, which is the little shine. Then there's tube, and then there's the gradient. Okay, so I'm going to copy all those over. So select them all. Command C, and then we'll just go and create a new pen, and I'm just going to paste all that into this. This is my like a template that I use all the time, and it's got stuff set up for me. So I paste all that in, and we end up with what we had basically in Illustrator. The first thing to do is we can just get rid of that horrible background, and I'm going to just call that gradient something nicer. So select them, both of those, grad form. We're going to call it what shall I call it? I will call it rainbow gradient. Okay. And I'm just going to get rid of this horrible rubbish here, and I'm going to get rid of that. Okay. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to turn the white tube into a mask. Okay. So I'm going to where is it? Oh, well, let me get rid of that as well. Let me take the tube, and I'm going to go into the definitions, which is at the top. I'm going to cut that put it on my clipboard, that tube, yeah, so it disappears from down here. And just go and create a mask with an ID equals gradient mask, or grad mask we call it. Okay, close that off, and then I'm just going to paste that in, making sure that it's white, because otherwise it won't show through, the gradient won't show through. And then the next thing to do is I never apply masks or filters directly to an element. I always apply it. I always put it in a group first and then apply it. So let's just get under this gradient here. So first of all, we'll put it in a group. So that's the this is the gradient, the rectangle with the linear gradient applied to it. Sorry, my screen's a little bit. I'm only recording 102.4x768, so you keep probably missing the bottom bit. Okay, let me move this up. There you go. So we've got a new group with a rectangle in it, and we'll just assign the mask. Mask equals URL hash, and what was it? Grad mask, was it? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now we've got the gradient applied to the rectangle, and it's being masked. Okay, so this is all kind of cool, but what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to animate all of the colors continually to the right. And at the moment, I would probably say to the rectangle, move to the right, and then it would just disappear. So we need some way of looping the colors. The way we do that is instead of just applying the the fill to be the rainbow gradient, we're going to create a pattern, and in that pattern is going to be a rectangle with the linear gradient applied to it. I'll show you. So we're going to go back up to the definitions. Definitions are sort of non-rendered. They're part of the shadow DOM, and they're not rendered, so that you can do stuff in here. So we're going to create a pattern. Yeah. Close that off. Right. And we will call the pattern ID equals grad pattern. Okay. We want to basically take this. We're going to take this out. Out of the mask. We're going to take this rectangle out of the mask group for a minute. Take that out. Cut. And we'll just paste it into the pattern. Okay. This has a fill of rainbow grad. That's cool. We're going to set its X to 0 and its Y to 0 because we want to then place it on the stage ourselves later on. So we want this to be sort of initialized at 0, 0. Now with the pattern, a pattern is like a sort of a container, and you specify the width and height of that container. The graphics inside the pattern that repeat over can be sort of any size. They can be bigger than the actual pattern container if you want, or they can be the same size if you want a sort of a pure looping pattern, or they can be smaller, so you've got a gap between the actual graphic inside and the bounds of the pattern. In this case, we want them both to be the same. We want the pattern to be the same size as its sort of contents, if you see what I mean, so that it loops perfectly. Which means we're going to copy over the dimensions of the rectangle, which is, I think it was 400 by. This is, don't forget, these are the pattern dimensions. I think it's 62.4 actually, bizarrely. And we're going to set its x. We don't probably need to do this because otherwise, if you don't set x and y, it assumes you mean 0, 0. One other very important thing to set inside the pattern, the pattern tags attributes, and that is its units. So we're going to say pattern units equals user space on use, and this ensures that the coordinates of the pattern correspond with your SVG. Do you know what? I actually don't really fully understand it. I've looked at the documentation several times and I've just sort of drawn a blank and gone off and like made a cup of tea or something. I don't really understand it. Anyway, if you don't have it, you can't see it. If you don't have this, you can't see the thing. So I put it in. One day the penny will drop and I'll understand it. I'm sure Sarah Suadan will probably be able to enlighten me, but currently there's a different one as well. There's object bounding box or something like that. That one doesn't work. So user space on use, that does work. All right. And now, okay, so we've got our pattern now. Oops, we've got our pattern. And what we want to do is, remember we had the rectangle down here in the mask, which I've still got on my clipboard, by the way. I'm going to put that back in, but instead of filling it with the gradient, we're going to fill it with the pattern, okay? And we can do that by saying, instead of calling the rainbow gradient, we're going to, what's the pattern name? Grad pattern. So we're going to put gradient, grad pattern. Please show. Yay! Oh, hang on, I've lost a green bit. What's happened here? Oh, right. Okay, so when I created the gradient, I created the gradient. Gradients are very sort of user coordinate specific. And when I create the gradient inside Illustrator, they're sort of very specific about where in the artboard you create it. So if you notice in linear gradient, I've got the x1, i.e. the first x position of the gradient is 100. It shouldn't be. It should be 0. And I think the x2 should be 400. So basically we're just taking 100 off both of those because there's a 100 pixel offset. And now you'll notice that it's arrived quite nicely. That's cool. So be aware of that. If you're using the gradient, because originally we were using the gradient applied directly to a rectangle, but now we're using it in a pattern, and the pattern everything's at 0, 0, so that everything. The reason why I use 0, 0 is so that everything is reset to one common spot, i.e. 0, 0, and then in your code later on you can set it to be wherever you want. But I always start off with 0, 0, because it's sort of a common starting initialization point. The Y positions, they don't matter because the gradient goes from top to bottom anyway, so it doesn't matter if I change any of these. It won't make any. Oh no, hang on. So if I change that to 0, 0, it won't make any difference. Sorry, 0, 0. As long as these two as long as the Y's are both the same, otherwise you'll end up with a diagonal gradient. So I could set that to 100, get a diagonal one, and then set that 100. So those don't matter as long as they're the same, because that's what you want with this gradient. You want it up and down. All right. I mean that's pretty much it. I mean, what next? We need to set the filter. There's a sort of a drop shadowy filter thing on it, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it over from this one first, and then I'm going to just talk through it because I'm I'm not good enough to like remember the entire syntax because it took me ages to write it. Right, okay, so filters. So what we're going to do is we want to apply a filter, like a Gaussian blur, to the tube, and we want to make sure that the original graphic is composited back on top, and the blur carries along the colours of each of the segments. Okay, so in the definitions, I'm just going to paste this in. This is from my other one, right? Okay, and let's go up to the top and let's break it down. So the filter, I'm going to give it an ID of drop. I'll come to these bits in a minute. These are important, but I'll come to them in a minute. So the first thing we want to do is set an offset. Now the offset is when you have a drop shadow or a blur, you can set it to be just to sort of move down to the left, down to the right a little bit, so that especially with drop shadows, so it looks like the light source is from top left and it's shining down. So that's what this is for, and it basically takes the source graphic that the filter will be applied to, i.e. the tube. It will take the source graphic and it will move it on the x-axis, none, and then down a little bit on the y. Okay. The next bit is a Gaussian blur. We're going to take the output from the offset as the input, so the result of this is what we're going to call the result. Or we could call that pig if you want, and we could say this is called the input is pig. Yeah, we're not going to do that. So the offset out and the input for the blur is offset out. Okay, and then that's standard deviation is just like the blur. I don't know why in SVG some of the names of these things are just crazy. You know, just put blur amount, or I'm sure there's some clever like mathsy sort of reason for calling them that, but really, I find SVG in many ways is sort of very inaccessible because the naming convention of some of this stuff is just mental. Anyway, okay, so the next thing, so these are happening in sequence. So we're going to offset it, the main graphic. We're going to apply a blur to it. This is a function of the alpha channel, and again, this could be just named sort of like alpha with a value of 0.7, but no, it's type linear, slope is 0.7. Basically, you don't need this if it's 0. I don't really understand what that does anyway. Every time I play with it, it does some crazy stuff. So this basically is like turning the opacity up and down on the filter. Okay, it's nothing cleverer than that. There are different versions of this, like discrete and table and all sort of stuff, but go and look at the documents. they're really difficult to understand. I just end up playing with them until it looks right. And finally, so we've offset it, we've blurred it, we've made sure that the opacity of the effect is set down a little bit, and then we're compositing the main source graphic, i.e. the non-blurred version, and we're setting the operator to be over, so it's over on top. It's basically on top of it. Okay, so I hope that's explained it. So the ID is called drop. Let's go down to the filter now. I don't. When I apply filters, I mentioned this earlier, when I apply filters and masks, I never apply them directly to the element, and I never apply them together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply now, I'm going to apply another, create another group, and we're going to do filter equals URL drop, and this is placing everything inside a group, and that group has a filter. And then suddenly you'll see that, let's go back up to the filter, the offset is making sure that the blur has dropped down a little bit. sorry, the original graphic has dropped down. So if I actually turn this off, let me just turn that off. You'll see that it's duplicated the graphic and moved it down. Yeah, and there's your slope, so I can set that to a lower value, and it's just sort of slightly, like a fainter version, so you can get some kind of cool effects with filters. But let me put that back. You could have a sharper blur, a sort of a sharper one if you wanted to. I wanted to copy Constantine's version as accurately as I possibly could. Oh, hang on. Let's go and nick his background color. What's his background color? In fact, I've got it in here. Let me nick that so that it. Right. Okay. Right. So that's, oh right, yeah. So the filter. Let me just get rid of that. If you don't have, if you don't set sort of X and Y and height and width positions of things like drop shadows and blurs that essentially take the image and expand it, if you like, the result is an expansion because it's blurring, it's going out. You end up with this horrible clipping, and in order to get around that, you have to set the X position and the Y position of the filter to the left and up away from the graphic or the thing that's applied to, and then you set the width and height to be a few 100% bigger than what you think. These are kind of trial and error, and they're kind of based on the graphic that you're applying a drop shadow to or a filter to. So usually the X position and the Y position are negative values, and the width and height are never negative values. They're always positive values. So if I change this to the height to 80%, we'll probably get a clipping line. Oh look, it's completely disappeared. So if I put that to 180, you see, look, if I do that to 230. You'll get a little bit of it, and it's clipped along here. So you just do it until it completely appears. 240. I worked out that it was 280. Okay. Oh, okay. Hang on. So the shine. So that's that. I think that's all we need to do with that. The only other thing graphically is just set this shine. We'll set that to opacity equals, I think it's 0.3 or something like that, just to drop that down a little bit, 0.4, so that the shine on it is like the original, but do it to your taste. The final thing to do is to go to the JavaScript panel, and what we're going to do is we're going to animate the pattern. And we're going to animate the pattern's X position, I think. Its X attribute. Now, patterns are, if you can think of patterns a bit like background position in CSS. I don't know CSS very well. I sort of stumble my way through CSS, and I don't really like it. But I kind of understand background position a little bit, and yeah, so you can animate background position, and it kind of loops, and it actually is a very cool feature of CSS, and I've used it quite often. And so you can think of the X position of pattern to be the sort of first value of background position, because it's like 0, 0 or 0, 0. So X is 0 and Y is 0, and then background position 200. Space 0 is X position 200, Y position 0. So we can do TL timeline. I've already set that up. .2, and we can talk to the gradient pattern. Oops, and it's going to take, I don't know, what is it, like about 5 seconds. And we're going to say the X position goes to 400. Now, there's a problem with this, and that is that the pattern the X position of a pattern is an attribute. So we can just cut that for a sec. In TweenMax, we've got the attribute plugin that's built in, and this is how you use it. You just open up a new object and say the attribute X is 400. So that has looped nicely. Now there's two other things to do. One is to set the ease to be a linear dot ease none, so it doesn't sort of ease in and then ease out. It's a constant animation from 0 to x400, and then we're just going to set in the timeline, we're just going to say repeat -1, and that is it. Isn't that cool? So I hope you have enjoyed this and sort of learnt something from it. I learnt a huge amount from, let me just move this up a bit, and I've messed that up now, haven't I? I learnt a huge amount from Constantine's pen, just by looking at the CSS and looking at the, not so much from the CSS itself, but just looking at the concepts that he used, and like the clever use of linear gradients, and the coloured drop shadow. I don't know how you do that in CSS. I didn't really look at how he'd done that. I just know how to do it in SVG. And the looping, you know, it's just a really efficient way of doing it, and the result is just, you know, it's really good. Yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you've learnt as much as I learnt when I looked at his pen. And I'll put the URL of his pen and this finished pen in the kind of notes, whatever, and I'll see you soon. Cheers, bye.